Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session titled Tech Tools and Learning Strategies to Better Engage Students. My name is Elliot Markowitz. I'm the head of content here at Fierce Education. We have a jam-packed day that started with an in-depth interview with Greg Flanick. He's the CIO at Baldwin Wallace University. If you missed it, it will be available for viewing on demand within 24 hours, so please go ahead and check that out. This session is going to focus on student engagement challenges and solutions in higher education. It is no secret that the forced online learning environment has been a challenge for instructors and students alike. Keeping students attentive and engaged in a physical classroom or lecture hall was already a challenging proposition. This challenge is now compounded greater in a completely remote or a hybrid approach and is now the top priority among higher learning instructors. So here with us today to talk about these specific issues and share some of their best practices and successes are Dr. Joanna Bauer. She's with Claremont Lincoln University. Dr. Leslie Haas, she's with Buena Vista University, and Mark Fuller, he's product manager at Labster, which is partnering with us on this event. But before we get to Dr. Joanna Bauer, we're going to roll out an audience polling question. So please remember to participate in that. The more engaged you are, the more valuable of an experience this will be for you. So as that poll rolls out, it reads, has technology helped in bettering student engagement in this blending learning environment? Some faculty members have struggled with technology. So yes, it is critical. We couldn't do it without it. B, it has helped, but it's still challenging to keep students interested. So much more must be done. Or C, very little. Students are not responding well to remote learning, regardless of the technology being used, and that continues to be a struggle. So we're going to give the audience just a couple more seconds to vote on that before we push out the results and get to our speakers. So let's see what the audience has to say. So when we asked, has technology helped in bettering student engagement in this blended learning environment? We could see that 35% said it's critical, 62% said it's helped, but there's still challenges. That's the majority. 2% said very little. So obviously, faculty are embracing technology, but there's a long way to go before it obviously becomes seamless and they really feel like they're engaging students the way they need to be engaged. And with that, I'm going to officially turn it over to our first speaker, Dr. Bauer. So take it over, Dr. Bauer.
Hello, thank you so much, Ellie. It's so nice to be here. I'm glad we saw the results of that poll because when we talk about technology, and we have a three-pronged approach at Claremont Lincoln University. So technology, very important, of course, to be accessible to as many people as possible, but there's other things that also need to come into play. So that's what my presentation is going to be focused on, is our three-pronged approach to that. And the three-pronged approach is human-centered design and user experience, and then user interface. So let's just jump right into that, those three pieces. The first of our three-pronged approach is our student and faculty experience, because let's face it, students and faculty are the two most important parts of this equation. You can't have learning without the students, and you can't have learning without your instructors, your faculty. So when we talk about integrating the human-centered design, we really want to focus on that as well as the user experience. And there's some very specific tips in order to do this element of it. And the first is moving from a teacher-centered to a student-centered, or even better, a subject-centered approach. Teacher-centered is the traditional, I'm going to tell you what you need to know. I'm the expert role as the faculty member. But we want to move beyond that. We want to move beyond to what do the students need to know? What do the students need to learn? What do they want to learn? And then also to subject-centered, which means that we're really talking about content and how to build that knowledge and that skill base of content. We need to, as we know, building community, inviting diversity, engagement, equity, inclusion, belonging, all of those elements. We need to update our curricula. That includes diverse sources, resources. Our traditional sources, our traditional academe is certain kinds of voices. And we need to expand that to make sure that we're really including a variety. Fix the one-size-fits-all programming. And what I mean by that is, if you are asking questions in discussion that would elicit the same answer from everyone, Who was the first president of the United States? That's a one size fits all question, because you're going to get one size, one answer. We need to move beyond that. We need to engage. We need to ask for participation. We need to really develop those experiential learning questions, invite their own experiences. It doesn't matter how old they are, how young they have experiences in which to share. And those are the things that we need to be inviting. We need to focus on practical application. So right now, higher education is in that quandary of how do we stay traditional, or do we invite workforce and industry partnerships? Well, we need to move to those industry partnerships and practical application. What we talk about at Claremont Lincoln University is, can our students use it today? Can they use the content? Can they use the discussion? Can they use what they're learning today, right now? Or can they use it tomorrow in a report, or in a handbook, or in a proposal? So practical application. We also need to champion reflection and critical thinking. And we talk about that a lot, but I think our students don't necessarily know what critical thinking is. But we really need to champion what that is. And to critically think and to truly learn, we must hear opposing viewpoints. We have to be able to hear opposing viewpoints, different perspectives, different ideas, and then reflect on those. So that's why we say embrace the reflection period of the curriculum, and also embrace peer-to-peer learning. All of our students have experiences. They have things that they want to say. We also need to have the faculty and networking with students. So those are the most important pieces that we look at for student and faculty experience, and see how you can integrate those ideas. Moving to customized content creation. This is our second prong of our three-pronged approach to engaging the students. And this is really making sure that we have some content creation that is bespoke, meaning it's original, it's authentic. These are case studies. These are targeted scenarios. These are specific applications that our students can relate to, and that our faculty bring with their own experience, because our faculty are practitioners in their field as well as academics. We need digital interactive trainings. And so what that means is really making sure the webinars are interesting, really making sure there's a workspace for students to go to for increased networking and discussion and understanding. And this is one of the things that we often talk about, is we want to make sure that our faculty have good presentation skills. As Elliot spoke earlier, some places the faculty have just been thrust into this digital environment, and they perhaps need to upskill or reskill their presentation skills. So we want to make sure that we're doing that as well. Work groups for collaborative content review. Nobody should be coordinating or building content on their own. It should be a collaborative experience, because then that brings in all different kinds of perspectives and sources and voices and so on. And that also provides networking opportunities for faculty and also for students to come in and engage and provide their own feedback and their own content as well. All of this together feeds the leadership skills and cultural competence. Again, that diversity of voices, that belonging, that connection, that trust, that respect. All of that's needed for the customized content creation and engagement of students in general. And then when we move into education technology, this is our user interface. It must seamlessly integrate with the LMS. We can't have competing where the software and the applications aren't working seamlessly with our LMS. Our Director of Innovation and Educational Technology has worked very hard to make sure that this happens. There are tons and tons of applications out there, but they have to integrate seamlessly. Badging. It seems funny, but because of social media, people like to get badges. They like to get little stars and awards and things. And they also like to see our progress bars. So how far along are you in your journey, whether it's the course or whether it's the program? So we have started to integrate badging for our courses and also progress bars that they can see. Collaborative annotations. We use Hypothesis, which is an application that works with our LMS, but there's also Perusal. And this means that you can, there's asynchronous annotations that students and faculty can engage in together, and they can learn together in that way. interactive and self-paced writing and plagiarism training. We use Unicheck, but there's many, many of them. This is really important to make sure that it's self-paced yet interactive. And again, with the badging, making sure plagiarism and writing is a core competency. And then performance-based skill building. We use Go React and VidGrid. And this is where we can really look at the videos, the communication, the collaboration that people are doing. And we can have the grading already in there, the assessment pieces are already in there, and that we understand and they understand that performance skill building and reskilling. And then lastly, we use Quizlets for interactive quizzes. There's, again, a lot of different ways that can happen, but those are the key applications that we use for our education technology and our user interface. And I see Yvonne there, you're saying that students like Perusal, and I would agree. These are pieces that we can easily put into our applications and into our courses that engage, and they really make sure that they have that belonging, because we know students who are engaged, students who feel that they're having a connection with their community and practical application, we know that they're going to retain in their courses, that they're going to learn more, and we see that through the assessment. So again, just to wrap up, engaging those diverse perspectives with the three-pronged approach, making sure that we have the right kinds of material, the right kinds of interaction with our faculty and our students, and then introducing education technology that is also going to add to that collaboration spirit and that community building. So those are my tips. Hopefully you can use some of them along your journey of engaging your students as well. Back to you, Elliot.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bauer. Those are some great tips, and you went through them very quickly. Hopefully you can join us in the Zoom at the end of the day, and people may have some more questions for you. I'm now going to introduce Dr. Leslie Haas from Buena Vista University, who's done some very innovative things on her own to engage students and make sure that they're retaining information and they're keeping pace with the class. So take it away, Dr. Haas.
Thank you very much. I wanted to start and let you know that my presentation is a little more focused just on my classroom, what I was able to do with my students. Also at our university, we not only did hybrid, but we did something called High Flex. So I would go to campus and meet with students face-to-face, and I would also have students on Zoom in the same class. So lots of things were going on. So very quickly we had to get creative. So I want to share some of that with you. So I'd like to talk a little bit about literacy. I am a literacy educator. I teach future teachers how to teach literacy. And I'm hoping by the end of my talk that you will see you are also a literacy teacher, no matter your field. So literacy really used to always be considered reading, writing, listening, and speaking. But now in today's world, it's the ability to identify, understand, interpret, create, communicate, compute, communicate using visual, audible, and digital materials across disciplines and in any context. So it's really important that we make sure that our students have a great literacy foundation, because engagement becomes the catalyst when when educators incorporate individual schema, interests, and motivation into culturally and linguistically responsive instruction. So if we are teaching our students to be literate in these terms in 2021, then we are able to engage the literacy that they are bringing, the literacy they're engaged with outside of the academic setting into the academic setting. So when we think of blended learning, we're looking at multimodal opportunities for students to interact with material that we're teaching. So instead of just thinking about teaching from a traditional text or teaching from traditional academic journal articles, we really need to bring in the multimodal aspect of blended learning. We need to look at books, comics, games, music, newspapers, photos, podcasts, The more variety you can bring in, the more engaging students find it. Also, this is where you have an opportunity to honor students' culture and honor students' home language, because there's lots of different ways you can bring in quality learning opportunities for our students that are outside of books and journal articles. One of the things that I used in my classes this past year were multimodal text sets. So again, with this idea of blended learning, we want to bring in all kinds of digital ways to get an idea across. So whether you teach science or social studies, and in my case, I teach future teachers how to teach kids literacy, there's lots of ways you can bring in text sets that go across a theme. And again, those can be maps, photographs, art, audio recordings, music. So we have to kind of think outside of the box in how we're going to bring kids in. And I'm a former K-12 teacher as well. So I'm thinking little kids and I'm thinking higher ed kids and, everyone. How do we engage them and how do we honor who they are outside the academic setting? So here are some engagement strategies that have worked for me. And I call them the 3 C's. So collaboration, competition, and creation. So when we think about using games, and there's game-based learning and gamification, which we won't get into all of that right now, but here I'm talking about game elements. So when you're able to collaborate with students via high flex or hybrid or even online classes, developing games and using games offers opportunities for students to collaborate. By supporting one another through combined strengths and weaknesses, gameplay engagement is often increased through a sense of team and camaraderie, through teamwork. So, and then competition, students' progress can be measured via badges, which we heard earlier, checkpoints, levels, XP, that's experience points for those of you who are gamers. Competition strategies can be individualized or can incorporate multiple types of groupings. So students can compete with themselves. We can put them in breakout rooms. Each room compete against one another. So there's lots of different ways to think of this. And then creation. This is my favorite because when we allow students to create engaging games, then, they always say that when you have to teach something, you know it just a little bit more, right? You have to dive into it deeper. So the same thing happens when our students create games. And so it brings together, they create them individually or collaboratively to go over things like processes, concepts, vocabulary within the classroom itself. So engagement tools. I just put a couple of examples. There's many, many more than this, but game apps, I saw in the chat earlier from the earlier presentation that a lot of you really like Kahoot. So I also think Kahoot is great. Poll Everywhere, it's an oldie but a goodie. And then Quizlet. Quizlet tends to work really well within LMS systems. I think a lot of you probably use that as well. And then game design. So I have 2 different examples here. One, the first one that I'm providing is simply board games. It's a template for students to create board games. And the great thing about that is when I am working with kids or students across Zoom, each of them can have the board and create a game based on what concept we are looking at. They can create a game based on vocabulary. They can create a game based on concepts. So it helps once they have their schema and their background knowledge, they can move forward with this game creation and then even begin to look for and develop their understanding of the concept through the game development itself. So if we're on Zoom and we each have a board and then we want to play, then we can play a traditional board game across Zoom. So it works out really great. The other one is Scratch. It's an online opportunity for you to actually create a game. So it's made coding a game super easy. It's a drag and drop process. So if you want to create a character and put in a scene in the background and you want your characters to ask questions or interact with each other or go on a quest, it's all a drag and drop opportunity. So any of you who've created websites through something like Weebly, it's very similar to that. So that is tons of fun. And then game templates. These can be found anywhere. They're all over the internet, but Jeopardy, Memory, and Wheel of Fortune, you can find templates for those that are a PowerPoint. They're PowerPoints that then you just go in and put your own information in with your students, for your students. So then I want to just take a second to talk about assessment when you're working with games. While many of the strategies and tools provided can be used to assess learning through games, it's important to remember that engaged gameplay offers opportunities for trial and error. This is the important part. When assessment drives instruction rather than grades, the learning community is completely altered. This approach allows students to feel safe when experimenting with new ideas and concepts without the fear of failure or loss of grade points. So this is truly why I believe working with games with our students is so important, because they get an opportunity to fail and try again. Trial and error. And lastly, I just wanted to end with this note that I believe literacy as gameplay has the potential to level the education playing field in terms of access, engagement, and equity through culturally and linguistically responsive teaching. This awareness provides understanding around the idea that games are a part of our cultural practices. By recognizing literacy embedded in games, educators honor students' non-academic literacy experiences and allow for an engaged pull into academics rather than a mandated push. All right, thank you so much. Elliot, back to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Haas. Certainly after speaking with you earlier and interviewing you earlier, we knew you had a real innovative approach to engaging students. And hopefully at the end of the session, we'll have a couple of questions for you to, give us a little bit more information on that. So now it's time to introduce our final speaker on this topic of better engaging, higher education students through the use of technologies and tools. And here is Mark Fuller. He's a product manager at Labster, who's partnering with us on this event. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark now. So take it away.
Thanks so much, Elliot. And I'm very, very excited to be here and speaking with you all. And also very excited how many common themes there are between our various presentations here, because I think it really helps illustrate some of the challenges and opportunities here. So my background, as Elliot mentioned, is more on the learning tool side, partnering with faculty and instructors to create great learning experiences, especially online platforms and online tools of varying kinds. My company, Labster, we build virtual science labs for university and high school students. And really, we were founded on this principle that student engagement and outcomes are, they're not acquaintances, they're not friends, they're married, they're tied at the hip. Right. And our co-founder, Mads Bond, created Labster because he was teaching biotechnology classes at Harvard and at his university in home university in Copenhagen. And students' eyes were glassing over, right? And especially in the back row. And really that's where this idea came from. So I think the question becomes, how can learning tools, some of these games that we're mentioning, other online platforms, be part of the solution, but not the only solution? So I think we know lack of engagement is a problem. We've seen the statistics, the literature, motivation is an issue. It cuts across disciplines, of course. I'm using STEM here because that's my frame of reference right now. Huge numbers, 40 up to 60% of intended STEM majors switch away to other areas. more than 80% of instructors are using more traditional methods, sometimes, and in many cases, lecture only, the most standard kind of traditional lecture-based approach. And what we see are sometimes not the greatest results coming from those practices. So one way to think about Labster, just as a case study, as an example, is it's like a flight simulator, right? It's a flight simulator for science students, for biology, chemistry labs, things like that. And it's a very hands-on experience where you walk through in this immersive 3D world and perform a series of tasks. And so that there is one version of people that may say, lecture is bad. Like just the traditional sage on the stage approach, it's not effective. And technology is great. Technology is always great. Tools are helpful. But I don't believe that's true either, right? It's not an either or, and it's not a one size fits all solution, as others have been saying. There is a lot of literature that learning by doing, active learning, activates something in people's minds and their brains and helps students absorb the material and engage and feel a little bit more motivated. But we also, I think, have seen, whether through the literature or through experience, that mixing our media, mixing our methods, having this multimodal approach, as others have mentioned, is really the most effective solution in so many ways. One of the seminal studies on virtual labs and some of these interactive games showed that students who learned in the control just with PowerPoint slides in a very traditional lecture method learned X amount. Those who learned just with virtual lab experience learned quite a bit higher, maybe 70-something% higher. But it was combining them that actually had the best results, that it was actually doubled up over 100% of kind of increased outcomes. And so I think that's so important to keep in mind here. It's the combination. It's not just lectures, not just interactive games or learning tools or something like that, but it's the combination. Every student learns a little bit differently, right? If I know myself personally, if it's not written down visually, represented in some way, it will go in one ear and out the other, right? So it's discussions, it's chat rooms, it's breakout rooms via Zoom, it's some of the games we've been talking about, it's problem sets, it's Kahoot polls, things like that, videos, interactives, reading materials. So somehow the combination, the variety and variability here is where so much of the energy comes from and creates that stickiness, we think, among a lot of students. And another thing to keep in mind is that could also be true within a tool itself, right? So this is using Labster as an example of some of the different components that are in our virtual games, our virtual labs, whether it's real life stories or quizzes or background theory material, the opportunity to fail and kind of replay things over and over again. But it's for a reason, right? And so I think that, yes, we send students to Mars to complete missions and have them solve a CSI style murder mystery with using PCR and other kind of science concepts. But it's not just gamification because it's fun or its own reason, or just kind of for its own sake. Let's say it's in the service of launching students into the actual learning experience. Maybe you give it a frame, you give it a kind of a fun story or an actual real life relevance and real life scenario, but you then move them very quickly into the hard part because it needs to be challenging too. It's okay to have fun experiences, but it's combining the rigor of the learning design and the actual content you're trying to cover with maybe a little bit of gamification or other elements, that variety we talked about before, that makes it engaging and makes it sticky for students and makes them sit up a little bit straighter. And another thing that I think is important to mention is scaffolding it, right? Not having it be a one-off here or there just to break things up, but to essentially have that pre-reading, that theory material, then have your activity, and then have the synthesis, the consolidation, the analysis that comes later, the reflection on what did we actually learn here? What was this for? Can I connect what I read in the book to the activity, whether it's an in-person lab or a board game you played, or a virtual lab or something else like that? So one of maybe the final point I wanted to make is I think we all know how extrinsically motivated students are. Am I going to get a good job and make a lot of money and have a successful career? What's the grade? Especially more than anything else, right? Is this going to be on the quiz or the test? What's my grade going to be? But I think some of the opportunities with the things we're talking about here, whether they're interactive online tools or platforms or different discussion methods, breakout groups, teamwork, whatever else it may be, is it really can help inculcate that sense of intrinsic motivation that brings students out of their shell a little bit and helps move the needle in the learning, and I think in a more powerful way. So hopefully if that becomes the case, you can have this virtuous circle of engagement and outcomes, and it's just a much richer learning experience in general. So that's it for me, Elliot. I don't know if you're jumping back in.
Yes, I am. Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Dr. Bauer and Dr. Haas, for your valuable insights. Certainly, you touched upon, a lot of great ideas. We saw it in the chat. Everything comes down to engaging the students, and that wasn't easy when you were in person. Certainly isn't easy when there's a hybrid environment, and even more difficult when it's mostly a remote environment. So all of those tips, from interactivity to games to the badging system, are all fantastic ideas. Coming up next at 3:40, we'll be discussing ensuring student accessibility, I should say. So make sure you join that. But first, there'll be another chance to network with your peers for a few minutes if you go into the chat room. And finally, don't forget, at the end of the show, there'll be a Zoom session where anyone can participate and discuss what is on their minds. If you missed any part of this session, it will be archived within 24 hours, and you can view it on demand. So I'll see you in the next session, everybody.